The transport ship cut through the pink sky of Vareth Prime with more speed than necessary. Inside, Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan checked his equipment one last time. He was a human officer with brown hair and green eyes, wearing the dark blue uniform of Earth's military. Next to him sat Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, his assistant, holding several sealed cases filled with data files. Jake looked out the window at the massive building below. The Galactic Military Academy had stood on this planet for 3,000 years. It trained warriors from 47 different alien species. The building was made of crystal that sparkled in the sunlight. It was beautiful and impressive. The ship landed with a slight bump. Jake stood up and grabbed his bag. Amy followed him to the exit ramp. As the door opened, warm air rushed into the cabin. Jake took a deep breath and stepped outside. A group of aliens waited for them on the landing platform. In front stood Commander Vexthor, a tall creature with silver scales and 4 amber eyes. He was a Kralix, one of the most respected species in the Coalition. Behind him stood several other instructors from different alien species. Jake walked forward and extended his hand in the human greeting. Vexthor looked at the hand for a moment, then carefully grasped it. The alien's grip was strong but controlled. "Commander Vexthor," Jake said with a smile. "Thank you for having us here, Lieutenant Commander Sullivan," Vexthor replied in perfect English. His translator device made his voice sound smooth. "We are honored to host Earth's first instructor at our academy. Please call me Jake, we're all friends here now." Vexthor's scales rippled slightly. This was how his species showed emotion. Jake had learned from his briefing materials. "Very well, Jake, let me show you to your quarters." They walked through the academy grounds. Students of various species moved between buildings. Some had scales, some had fur, some had skin like stone. A few floated in tanks of water. All wore their species-specific uniforms in different colors. Jake noticed how orderly everything was. Students walked in straight lines. They spoke quietly. Everything seemed calm and organized. It was very different from human military academies where young soldiers were often loud and energetic. "Your room is in the visiting instructor wing," Vexthor explained as they entered a tall building. "You will have access to all training facilities and classrooms. Your schedule begins tomorrow, but today you may rest and observe." Jake's quarters were simple but comfortable. A bed, a desk, a bathroom, and a window overlooking the training grounds. He unpacked his clothes and equipment while Amy set up their communication gear in her own room next door. Over the next few days, Jake attended classes and observed how the alien cadets learned. He sat in the back of lecture halls taking notes on his tablet. The more he watched, the more puzzled he became. The classes were about warfare, but they were very different from human military training. The instructors taught something called proportional response. This meant using exactly enough force to win, but no more. They taught proper engagement protocols, which meant following specific rules about when and how to fight. They taught about filing reports and getting permission before taking action. One day, Jake watched a tactical simulation. The cadet team faced an enemy force that outnumbered them 2-1. The simulation showed that the enemy would attack a civilian area in 30 minutes. The cadet commander, a young Kralix named Zira, made his decision. He ordered his forces to retreat and call for backup. The simulation ended with the civilian area being destroyed, but the military forces remained intact and reinforcements arrived later to drive away the enemy. The instructor praised Zira's decision. "Excellent work, cadet. You preserved your forces and followed proper protocol." Jake frowned. In a human military academy, that decision would have been considered a failure. The mission was to protect civilians, not to preserve military forces. After the class, Jake requested a meeting with Commander Vexthor. They met in the commander's office, a large room with windows on 3 sides. "Commander," Jake began, sitting across from the alien officer, "I've been watching your classes for almost a week now." "Yes? Do you have concerns about the translation devices?" "Sometimes human expressions do not translate well." "No, the translation is fine. It's your tactics I'm confused about." Jake leaned forward. "Your entire military system is based on avoiding casualties and achieving goals with the least amount of fighting possible." "Of course," Vexthor said, his scales showing confusion. "War is expensive. Lives are precious. We try to minimize loss while achieving our objectives. This is the civilized way. But what happens when you can't minimize loss? What happens when you're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time? Vexthor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. One retreats. One calls for backup. One waits for a better opportunity. This is basic military doctrine. Jake sat back in his chair. Right. Commander, I'd like to show your senior cadets some videos from human military history. I think there's something missing in their education. What is missing? The kind of knowledge that keeps soldiers alive when everything goes wrong and there's no backup coming. Vexthor considered this carefully. The humans had proven themselves capable fighters. They had won battles that seemed impossible. Perhaps their methods, however strange, had value. Very well, Vexthor finally said. You may present to the senior class. I will attend personally to observe, Jake nodded. You should probably warn them first. What I'm going to show them isn't pleasant. These are military cadets, Lieutenant Commander. They are training to be warriors. I'm sure they can handle historical footage. Jake's expression became serious. Commander, with respect, your cadets have been at peace for 300 years. They've never seen real war. What I'm about to show them will be shocking. We have combat footage from coalition battles. Surely human warfare cannot be that different. That's where you're wrong, Jake said quietly. Human warfare is very, very different. That evening, Jake sat in his quarters reviewing the videos he planned to show. Amy came in carrying 2 cups of coffee. Are you sure about this? She asked, handing him a cup. No, Jake admitted. But it's necessary. These cadets need to understand what humans are capable of. More importantly, they need to understand why we fight the way we do. Some of them might not be able to handle it. The footage is pretty intense, I know. But better they see it here in a classroom than learn about it in the middle of a battle when they're supposed to be working alongside human forces. Amy sat down next to him. What do you think will happen? Jake took a sip of his coffee. Honestly, I think some of them will be horrified. Some will be disgusted. A few might even request transfers away from any assignment involving humans. And the rest? The rest will either become excellent allies who understand us or they'll try to become like us. I'm not sure which outcome worries me more. The next morning arrived too quickly. Jake gathered his materials and headed to the main lecture hall. It was the largest classroom in the academy, with tiered seating that could hold over 100 students. When he arrived, he found it packed. 43 senior cadets filled the seats, representing 15 different species. Some were huge, some were small, some had many limbs, some had none. All wore their uniforms. All sat at attention. Commander Vexthor sat in the back row watching carefully. Jake stood at the front next to the large holographic display. He looked out at the assembled aliens and took a deep breath. Good morning, he began. I'm Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan from Earth. Before we start, I need to warn you about something. What I'm about to show you is real. These are not simulations or training videos. These are actual historical records from human wars. The cadets looked at each other with confusion. Why would he need to warn them about historical footage? Some of you may find this disturbing, Jake continued. If at any point you need to leave, you may do so. No one will think less of you. Now the cadets looked even more confused. They were military students training to be warriors. Why would historical videos be disturbing? Jake activated the display. Let's begin with some context. Everything you're about to see happened before humanity developed faster than light travel. We were stuck in our own solar system, fighting wars on our home planet. The year is 1944. The place is a beach we called Omaha. The hologram showed an aerial view of a coastline. Steep cliffs overlooked a wide beach. The ocean stretched out beyond. It looked peaceful from above, but Jake knew what was coming next. And soon the alien cadets would know too. The tactical situation was simple but terrible, Jake explained. The defenders controlled the high ground. They had excellent defensive positions with clear fields of fire. The attackers had to cross open water and then charge up an exposed beach. According to everything you've learned here, this attack should never have been attempted. He changed the view to show the perspective from a landing craft. The ramp was about to drop. But humans don't always follow tactical logic, Jake said quietly. Sometimes we do what must be done regardless of the cost. The ramp dropped and the lesson began. The ramp dropped and chaos erupted on the screen. Human soldiers rushed out of the landing craft into a storm of bullets. Bodies fell immediately. The water turned red. The noise was deafening even through the recording. The alien cadets sat frozen in their seats. Their eyes were wide with shock. This was not what they expected from a history lesson. On the screen, more humans poured out of the landing craft. They ran forward through the bullet storm. Some fell, others kept running. They dragged wounded soldiers through the water. They threw themselves behind metal obstacles on the beach. Then they got up and ran forward again. Kresh, a Drogath cadet with stone-like skin, spoke without raising his hand. His voice was barely a whisper. "They are not retreating." "No," Jake said calmly. "They are not," the footage continued. Minutes felt like hours. The humans kept coming. When one soldier fell, another took his place. When one leader died, someone else gave orders. The beach was covered with bodies. The water was filled with blood. Medical teams worked while bullets flew around them. The alien cadets could not look away. Some made sounds of distress in their own languages. Others sat completely still, as if moving might make what they were seeing more real. Jake watched their reactions carefully. He knew this was hard for them. These aliens had lived in peace for centuries. They fought wars with rules and protocols. They had never seen anything like this. After what felt like forever, the humans on the screen finally reached the top of the cliffs. They had taken the defensive positions. The battle was won. Jake paused the recording. The lecture hall was completely silent. "By the end of this day," Jake said, his voice cutting through the quiet, "over 2,000 of my people died on that beach. 9,000 more were wounded." He let that number sink in. Then he asked, "Can anyone tell me why they kept going? Why didn't they retreat?" Silence filled the room. Finally, Zira raised a claw slowly. "They did not calculate the cost?" "Oh, they calculated it," Jake replied. "The commanders knew thousands would die. They knew it would be a bloodbath. They attacked anyway." A Sereni cadet floating in her water tank asked, "Were they forced to attack? Did they have no choice?" "Every single soldier there was a volunteer," Jake said. "They chose to be there." More silence. The cadets looked at each other in confusion and horror. This made no sense by their standards of warfare. Kresh spoke again. "But why? Why would they not withdraw and find a different way? Why accept so many deaths?" Jake's expression became serious. "Because there was no other way. Because if they failed, millions more would die. Because sometimes the only path to victory is straight through hell." He activated the next video. "Let's continue." This footage is from about 20 years later. The place is a valley in a jungle. We called it Ayadrang. The scene changed to show dense jungle. A small group of about 400 human soldiers suddenly found themselves surrounded by over 2,000 enemy fighters. The odds were terrible. The fighting was even more intense than the beach landing. Soldiers fired their weapons at close range. They threw explosive grenades. They called in fire from aircraft above. The jungle burned. The noise was constant. For 3 days, Jake narrated over the chaos. These soldiers held their position. They were outnumbered 5-1. They ran out of water in the heat. Their ammunition ran low. Medical supplies were gone. And still they held. The cadets watched as wounded humans refused to be evacuated. They saw soldiers carrying injured friends while still fighting. They saw medical personnel working in the open while bullets flew around them. At one point in the footage, the humans were about to be overrun. The commander called in artillery fire on his own position. Explosions landed right on top of the human soldiers. Some died from their own fire, but the attack was stopped. "Final count," Jake said as the footage ended. 96 killed. 121 wounded. Enemy casualties were over 500 dead. The position was held. "Mission accomplished?" Jake turned to face the class. "Now I know what you're thinking. You think humans are crazy? You think we don't value our own lives? You think our tactics are brutal and wasteful?" He paused. "You're right. By your standards, everything I've shown you is wrong. The smart choice at the beach would have been to retreat and find another approach. The logical decision in the jungle would have been to break through the enemy lines and escape. But here's what you need to understand about humans. We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because we must, and when we must fight, when there's no other choice, we don't calculate odds. We don't worry about cost. We simply refuse to lose." Commander Vexthor stood up in the back row. His scales were rippling with emotion. "Lieutenant Commander, surely these are unusual examples. These cannot represent normal human warfare." Jake's face showed no expression. "Commander, these aren't unusual. I have hundreds more examples from every period of human history, from every culture on our planet. Should I continue?" The class sat in shocked silence. No one spoke. No one moved. "I think," Vexthor said slowly, We should take a break. 1 hour, then we will resume. The cadets filed out of the lecture hall in silence. They moved like people in a dream. Jake could hear their quiet conversations as they left. Every voice carried shock and confusion. Vexthor approached Jake at the front of the room. "Lieutenant Commander, I must ask, are humans truly this determined in every battle?" Jake looked up at the tall alien. "Commander, your people have been at peace for 300 years. Humans have been at war with something or someone for our entire existence. We've had thousands of years to learn how to fight. We're very, very good at it." He gestured at the holographic display. "And I haven't even shown them the really frightening stuff yet." Vexthor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "There is worse than what we just saw?" "Much worse. What I showed them was conventional warfare between human armies. Wait until they see what happens when humans face an enemy that threatens our civilians. Perhaps we should stop here. The cadets have learned enough." Jake shook his head. "With respect, Commander, they haven't learned nearly enough. They've seen that humans are willing to take casualties, but they don't understand why yet. They don't understand what drives us. And you believe more footage will help them understand?" "No, but it will help them realize that they need to understand. And that's the first step." When the break ended, the cadets returned slowly. Many had not eaten. They looked tired and disturbed. Several instructors had joined the audience, drawn by reports of what had happened. Jake stood waiting at the front. The display behind him showed a blank screen. "This afternoon," he began, "we're going to look at what happens when humans face enemies that aren't human. Specifically, what happens when someone threatens our families and our children." He activated the display. It showed a human colony planet. Buildings were burning. People were running and screaming. "This is Epsilon Colony 1 year ago. You might remember this incident. It's what brought humanity to the Coalition's attention." The cadets recognized it immediately. The Epsilon Colony attack had been big news throughout the Coalition. Pirate raiders had attacked a peaceful human settlement. The attackers were Krell pirates, Jake continued. The name brought hisses and clicks of disgust from several species. Everyone knew the Krell were brutal slavers. They hit the colony with overwhelming force. They were taking civilians as slaves. Standard Krell operation. The footage showed destroyed homes, injured people, children crying. It was heartbreaking. What the Krell didn't know, Jake said, his voice cold, was that a human military ship was nearby, the Valiant under Captain Henry Morrison. The display switched to show the bridge of a spaceship. A human with gray hair sat in the command chair. He was listening to emergency broadcasts from the colony. "Captain, we confirm civilian casualties. The pirates are loading survivors onto their ships. Time to reach them? 18 minutes if we go to maximum speed, sir. Do it. Battle stations. Prepare boarding teams." Vexthor felt ice run through his body. Boarding teams? The captain planned to board enemy ships during a battle. That was incredibly dangerous and rarely done in modern warfare. The recording showed the human ship accelerating at speeds that would be painful for most species. They closed on the Krell fleet quickly. The Krell had 5 ships. The humans had 1. Tactically, Jake said, this was questionable. The captain was outnumbered 5-1. Normal coalition rules would say to wait for backup. On screen, Captain Morrison was receiving damage reports. His ship was taking heavy fire from the Krell vessels. "Sir, their main ship is preparing to jump to light speed. They're going to escape with the prisoners." A pause. Then the captain's voice, calm and cold. "All power to engines. Ram them." The cadets gasped. Ramming was an ancient tactic, almost never used anymore. "It was desperate and dangerous, sir," the officer asked, clearly shocked. "You heard me. If we can't catch them before they jump, we ram. Set collision course." The bridge crew didn't argue. The Valiant surged forward, taking more damage but accelerating beyond safe limits. The Krell ship, larger but slower, tried to complete its calculations for the jump to light speed. They didn't make it. At the last second, the Valiant fired all weapons at point-blank range into the Krell ship's engines. Then it made a sharp turn that must have been painful for the crew. Jake advanced to the next recording. The tension in the lecture hall was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every cadet sat rigid in their seats. "This brings me to the main event," Jake said. "This is footage from the Battle of the Disputed Zone, the battle that ended the war and got humanity invited to join the Coalition." The display showed a massive space battle. Dozens of ships fought among the stars. The Coalition fleet was clearly struggling. Ships exploded. Escape pods launched. The defensive lines were collapsing. The enemy had 47 capital ships and over 200 support vessels, Jake explained. The coalition had 31 capital ships. You were losing. Vexthor remembered this battle well. He had watched it from command headquarters, feeling helpless as good officers and soldiers died. Humanity had 3 ships in the battle, Jake continued. Our newest vessels. First combat deployment. The Defiant, the Relentless, and the flagship Magellan under Admiral Lisa Martinez. The camera focused on 3 human ships. They were smaller than coalition capital ships but looked aggressive and dangerous. Sharp angles. Heavy weapons. Built for war. When Admiral Martinez looked at the tactical situation, she reached a conclusion. The coalition was following proper doctrine. Measured response. Calculated engagement. Minimal casualties. The enemy was using this against you. Their superior numbers were slowly overwhelming your defensive positions. On screen, the human admiral was speaking to her fleet. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, with dark hair and fierce eyes. All human vessels, this is Martinez. New rules of engagement. Disable all safety systems on weapons. Divert power from defensive shields to engines and guns. We're going hunting. Jake paused the recording. At this point, several coalition officers tried to stop her. They said she was being reckless, that she would get her crews killed. Would anyone like to guess what she said? Kresh spoke up slowly. She said the coalition was already dying. That being reckless was the only choice left. Close, Jake said. She said, and I quote, "Better to die fighting than watch good people die because we were too afraid to act." Then she cut communications and attacked. The recording resumed. What the 3 human ships did next was unlike anything the cadets had ever seen. They didn't stay in formation. They didn't coordinate with coalition forces. They simply accelerated to impossible speeds and tore into the enemy fleet like hunting animals attacking prey. The Defiant flew within meters of an enemy capital ship's hull. It used the larger vessel as a shield while firing at point-blank range into critical systems. When the enemy ship exploded, the Defiant was already moving to the next target. The Relentless lived up to its name. It pursued enemy vessels even when damaged, even when its shields failed. At one point, it rammed an enemy cruiser, destroying its own front section but taking the enemy ship with it. The back half of the ship kept fighting, and the Magellan led them both. Admiral Martinez commanded a dance of destruction that broke every rule the cadets had learned. The human ships took damage that should have forced them to retreat. They didn't retreat. They accelerated into the enemy formation and fought until their weapons were empty. Then they used debris as weapons. They used their own damaged sections as missiles. When the Relentless finally lost all power, the crew evacuated and the automated systems rammed it into an enemy carrier. The battle lasted 7 hours. When it ended, 39 enemy capital ships were destroyed or disabled. The remaining 8 fled. Coalition casualties were a third of what they would have been without human intervention. All 3 human vessels were destroyed or beyond repair. Human casualties were 73%. Nearly 3/4 of the humans who entered the battle died. Admiral Martinez survived, Jake said quietly. She was the last person evacuated from the Magellan before it exploded. When she reached the coalition flagship, she asked for another ship so she could continue the fight. The recording ended. The lecture hall was silent as a tomb. Several cadets had tears in their eyes. Others looked sick. A few looked angry, though Jake wasn't sure if they were angry at humans or angry at the situation. Jake turned to face the class. After watching all of this, I need to ask you something important. What did you learn today? No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, a small Zith cadet in the middle row stood on her multiple legs. Her voice was barely audible. I learned that humans are insane. Several other cadets made sounds of agreement. Clicks, hisses, growls in various languages, all meaning the same thing. Humans were crazy. Jake nodded slowly. He had expected this reaction. Yes, by your standards, we probably are insane. But let me offer a different perspective. We're not insane. We're desperate. Every single time, he gestured at the blank display. Humans don't fight like you do because we've never had the luxury of fighting like you do. We've spent our entire history fighting for survival on a dangerous planet, fighting against predators, fighting against nature, fighting against each other. We've never had the option of measured response. When we fight, it's because everything is already on the line. Vexthor stood again. Lieutenant Commander, with respect, the cadets have learned what they need to learn. Perhaps we should end here. I'm not finished, Commander. Jake's voice was respectful but firm. There's one more lesson, and it's the most important one. He looked at each cadet in turn. His green eyes moved from face to face, from species to species. Every single example I showed you today had one thing in common. We won, not because we were stronger or smarter or better equipped. We won because we refused to lose. So here's your final lesson. When you fight alongside humans, understand that we will never surrender. We will never retreat unless absolutely forced to. We will take risks that seem insane because the alternative is worse. And if you're going to serve with us, you need to be prepared for that. He paused. Or you can request transfer to units without human forces. No one will think less of you. No one will judge you. This is just who we are. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Zira stood slowly. Lieutenant Commander, I have a question. Go ahead, Cadet. If we do serve with humans, how do we learn to fight like you? Jake's expression softened slightly. You can't. Your species evolved differently. You value life differently. You think differently. But you can learn to work with us. To understand that when everything goes wrong, humans won't quit, and to trust that when we do something that looks crazy, we probably have a reason. Another cadet stood, Krana Drogath with massive stone-like arms. The footage showed humans protecting each other, carrying wounded while under fire, refusing to leave anyone behind. Yes, Jake confirmed. Is this why you fight so hard? For each other? For the first time since the presentation began, Jake smiled genuinely. Now you're starting to understand. We don't fight for territory or resources or glory. We fight for each other, for the person next to us, for the people back home counting on us. And we never ever leave our people behind. He deactivated the display. That's the end of today's lesson. Take the evening to think about what you've seen. Tomorrow we'll discuss practical applications. How to coordinate with human units in joint operations. Class dismissed. The cadets filed out slowly. Most were deep in conversation. Some argued quietly. Others walked in silence, processing what they had witnessed. Jake noticed that none of them looked the same as when they had entered that morning. Something had changed in them. Something fundamental. After the room emptied, Vexthor approached Jake. The alien commander's scales were still rippling with emotion. Lieutenant Commander, I must admit that was intense. I warned you. Commander, yes you did. Vexthor's scales settled into a thoughtful pattern. Tell me honestly, how many of my cadets do you think will request transfer away from human units after today? Jake considered this carefully. Based on similar presentations I've given before, about a quarter, maybe a third, and the rest? The rest will either become excellent allies who understand how to work with us, or they'll try to become like us. I've seen it go both ways. Vexthor made a sound that might have been a laugh. I suspect I know which category my nephew will fall into. He had the look of someone who just discovered a powerful new weapon. Commander, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really approve this presentation? You could have just had me teach basic coordination and sent me home. Vexthor was quiet for a moment. His four eyes focused on something distant. Because 300 years ago my people were like yours. We fought with desperation, with passion, with everything we had. Then we joined the coalition and adopted civilized warfare, and we became soft. He turned his gaze to Jake. When I watched your people fight at the disputed zone, I remembered what it was like when every battle mattered, when we fought not because it was efficient, but because we had to. I approved your presentation because my cadets need to remember that somewhere in the galaxy, people still fight like that. Jake nodded slowly. And if there's another war? One where the coalition can't afford to be civilized? Then I hope we have humans standing beside us. The two officers stood in silence for a moment. Outside, the sun was setting on Vareth Prime. The sky turned from pink to deep purple. Stars began to appear. Lieutenant Commander, Vexthor said finally, would you be willing to stay longer? The next morning, Jake arrived at the lecture hall to find it more crowded than before. Not only were all 43 senior cadets present, but at least 20 additional students had packed themselves into the available space. Word had spread throughout the academy about yesterday's shocking presentation. Vexthor stood at the entrance, looking both amused and frustrated. It seems your reputation precedes you, Lieutenant Commander. Should I send the extra students away? No. If they're curious enough to attend without being assigned, they should hear what you have to say. Besides, some of my instructors are here too. This should be educational for everyone. Jake set up his equipment and faced the crowd. He could see different emotions on the alien faces. Fear, curiosity, determination. In a few cases, barely hidden anger. "Good morning," he began. "I see we have new faces today. For those who weren't here yesterday, I'm Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan. I showed your classmates footage of human military history. If you haven't heard about it yet, I'm sure they'll tell you at lunch." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. "Today we're doing something different. We're going to talk about practical cooperation between human and coalition forces. Because despite what some of you might think after yesterday, we don't actually want to fight alone. We're much more effective when working with allies who understand us." He activated the display, showing a training exercise. This footage is from 6 months ago, shortly after humanity joined the coalition. It's a combined operation between a coalition cruiser and a human destroyer. Watch what happens. The recording showed both vessels responding to a practice emergency. The coalition ship followed standard rules. Slow approach, maximum shields, weapons ready but not charged. The human ship came in fast, weapons hot, shields balanced with engines for speed. When the practice enemy appeared, the coalition vessel began proper communication protocols. The human ship opened fire immediately. The result was chaos. The coalition ship had to move suddenly to avoid being in the line of fire. The human ship nearly crashed into the coalition vessel while making an aggressive turn. When the exercise ended, both crews were angry at each other. "This," Jake said dryly, "is what happens when neither side understands the other." The coalition captain filed a complaint saying humans were reckless and dangerous. The human captain filed a complaint saying coalition forces were too slow to respond. Both were right from their own point of view. He paused the recording. "So how do you fix this? How can forces with such different methods work together?" A Kralix instructor in the back raised a claw. "Communication and compromise." "Exactly. Let me show you the same exercise done last month with different crews who had received proper training." The new recording showed a similar situation. This time, the coalition vessel moved to a support position. It maintained strong shields and provided sensor information. The human vessel took the lead position, weapons charged and ready to engage. When the enemy appeared, the human ship attacked immediately, while the coalition vessel provided targeting data and protected the human ship's approach. The coordination was smooth and effective. The human ship's aggression was used properly. The coalition ship's defensive strength protected both vessels. When the exercise ended, both captains reported success. The difference? Both crews attended a joint training program where they learned each other's strengths and weaknesses. The coalition captain understood that humans will always engage aggressively, so he positioned his ship to support that aggression. The human captain understood that coalition vessels excel at defense and sensors, so she used that to her advantage. Jake switched to a different recording. Here's a real example. This is from a rescue operation at Centauri Station 3 months ago. A coalition medical ship was trapped by pirates. A human patrol ship was the closest vessel that could respond. The footage showed a sleek human ship approaching a station surrounded by 3 pirate vessels. The odds were bad. 1 light patrol ship against 3 armed pirates. The human captain, Commander Kevin Grant, did something smart. Instead of immediately attacking, he contacted the coalition medical ship and asked about their capabilities. The audio came through clearly. "Coalition vessel Aurora, this is human ship Osprey. What's your shield strength and electronic warfare ability?" "Osprey, our shields are at 85%. We have standard medical ship electronic systems. Nothing fancy. Can you generate a targeting disruption field when I tell you to?" A pause. "Yes, Osprey. We can do that. Outstanding. Here's my plan." What followed was a perfect example of working together. The medical ship positioned itself to maximize its shields, while generating an electromagnetic field that disrupted the pirates' targeting systems. The human patrol ship used that disruption to close rapidly, destroying 2 pirates in quick succession with precise fire. The 3rd pirate tried to escape but was disabled by a lucky shot from the medical ship's small defensive weapons. "0 casualties on either vessel," Jake said. "Mission accomplished." And it worked because both commanders talked to each other and adapted their tactics to work together. Zira spoke up from the front row. "But Lieutenant Commander, that required the human vessel to slow down and coordinate." "I thought you said humans don't do that." "I said we fight aggressively. I didn't say we're stupid. Jake smiled. When there's an advantage to coordination, we absolutely will coordinate. The key is understanding when to do what. He advanced to the next slide, showing a tactical diagram. Let's talk theory. Coalition doctrine uses what I call layered defense. You maintain strong shields. You establish good positioning. You wear down opponents through superior staying power. It's effective when you have time and resources. Human doctrine uses what I call overwhelming offense. We hit hard and fast. We don't give the enemy time to react. It's effective when speed and aggression matter more than lasting power. Neither approach is wrong. They're different tools for different situations. The question is, how do we use both together? For the next 2 hours, Jake walked the cadets through various situations. He showed how human aggression could be directed by coalition defensive strength, how coalition durability could be protected by human offensive action. He showed recordings of successful joint operations and carefully explained failed ones. Kresh raised a massive stone hand. Lieutenant Commander, what about situations where coordination isn't possible? When forces must act independently? Excellent question. The answer is each force does what it does best, but with awareness of what the other is doing. He pulled up another recording. This is from a recent operation against pirates in the outer sectors. The footage showed a coalition squadron and a human task force approaching a pirate base from different directions. They couldn't talk to each other directly because the pirates were jamming communications. Watch how this plays out. The coalition force approaches carefully, setting up a containment area around the base. Meanwhile, the human ships do what we call a thunder run, a straight assault through the middle of the base. On screen, the human vessels charged in, taking fire but dealing massive damage. The pirates, confused and overwhelmed, began to scatter. They ran directly into the coalition containment perimeter. Neither force coordinated directly, but both commanders understood what the other would do. The coalition admiral knew humans would attack aggressively, so he set up to catch anyone fleeing. The human commander knew coalition forces would establish containment, so she drove the pirates toward them. Result: pirate base destroyed. Minimal casualties on both sides. The operation took half the time it would have taken either force alone. An instructor in the back, a Sereni female named Counselor Nerith, raised a fin. This is all very impressive, Lieutenant Commander, but I have a concern. Your entire system seems based on accepting casualties. How do we work with a force that treats losses as acceptable? The room went quiet. It was the question many had been thinking but were afraid to ask. Jake's expression became serious. Counselor, I'm glad you asked that. It touches on the biggest misunderstanding about humans. We don't treat casualties as acceptable. We hate casualties. Every single loss hurts us deeply. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The difference is that we've learned through bitter experience that sometimes casualties are unavoidable. Sometimes the choice isn't between casualties and no casualties. It's between casualties now or disaster later. When a human commander orders an aggressive attack, they're not being careless with lives. They're making the calculation that acting decisively now will save lives overall. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. But it's never done lightly. He pulled up one more recording. This is Admiral Martinez again from the battle I showed you yesterday. This is footage from her ship's bridge recorded by internal systems. It's not classified, but it's also not widely shown. I'm showing it to you because I think you need to see it. The recording showed the Admiral on her bridge during the height of the battle. She was receiving casualty reports. Her face was pale but composed. Then came the report that the Relentless was lost with most of its crew. For just a moment, Admiral Martinez's control cracked. Her head bowed, her eyes closed, her jaw clenched tight. Then, visibly forcing herself to focus, she gave her next orders. The final week of Jake's assignment began with a surprise announcement. Vex Thor called an assembly of all senior cadets and several instructors. It has been proposed, he announced to the gathered crowd, that we conduct a joint training exercise, human tactics versus coalition tactics in a simulated combat scenario. The goal is not to determine which approach is better, but to show how they differ and how they might work together. He gestured to Jake. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan will command the human force. I will command the coalition force. Both sides will have mixed crews, human and coalition personnel working together. This will test everything you've learned this past week. The cadets buzzed with excitement and nervousness. A live exercise against actual humans would be unlike anything they had experienced before. Jake stepped forward. Ground rules. This is a simulation, but we'll treat it as real. That means real tactical decisions, real communications, and real consequences for mistakes. Commander Vexthor and I have agreed that the scenario will be challenging enough to push both sides to their limits. We'll be using the Academy's orbital simulator, 4 vessels on each side with mixed crews. Volunteers will be selected based on your performance over the past week. The simulation runs tomorrow. The entire Academy will be watching. That evening, Jake reviewed the volunteer list. Nearly every senior cadet had applied. After talking with Vexthor, they selected their crews. For the Coalition Force, Vexthor chose cadets who were excellent at traditional doctrine. Careful, measured, defensive specialists. For the Human Force, Jake selected cadets who had shown flexibility and aggressive thinking. This included notably Zira and Kresh. When Zira received his assignment, he sought out Jake in his temporary quarters. Lieutenant Commander, I must ask, why choose me? I'm Kralix. My people created Coalition defensive doctrine. I am not naturally suited to human-style aggression. Jake looked up from his tactical review. Zira, can I tell you a secret? Of course. Most humans aren't naturally suited to human-style aggression either. We don't do it because we enjoy it. We do it because we've trained ourselves to act against our instincts when necessary. He leaned back. You volunteered for my side. You watched the footage and instead of being scared away, you were interested. That tells me you understand that sometimes you need to fight against your nature to do what's necessary. I see. Besides, Jake smiled. You're Vexthor's nephew. If I can teach you to think like a human, imagine how that'll mess with his defensive planning. Zira's scales rippled with amusement. A fair point, Lieutenant Commander. The next morning, the simulation began. 8 cadets entered the Academy's most advanced combat simulator. 4 networked vessels, full crew stations, and a scenario designed by Vexthor and Jake working together. The rest of the Academy gathered in observation galleries to watch. The scenario was this. Both forces were responding to a distress call from a civilian station under attack by raiders. The first side to stop the raiders and secure the station would win. Complications. The raiders were heavily armed, the station had weak shields, and civilian casualties would count against both sides. Commander Amy Rodriguez served as exercise controller, watching from the main observation deck. All stations, this is exercise control. Scenario begins now. Both forces received the distress call at the same time. Immediately, the difference in approach became clear. Vexthor's coalition force began with a careful approach, scanning for threats, establishing a defensive perimeter, preparing to systematically eliminate raiders while minimizing risk to civilians. Jake's human force charged straight in. All vessels. Maximum speed toward the station, Jake ordered from his command ship. Kresh, you're in the lead. Draw their fire. Zira, swing wide and hit them from the side. Kelly and Marcus, stay on Kresh's wing and destroy anything that focuses on him. The cadet crews responded instantly. Kresh's vessel, shields forward, accelerated toward the raider formation. The raiders, as expected, focused their fire on the obvious threat. Taking heavy fire, Kresh reported, his voice surprisingly calm for someone whose ship was being hammered. Shields at 60%, hold steady. Zira, are you in position? Yes, ready to engage. Do it. Zira's vessel, having used Kresh's charge as a distraction, appeared on the raider's side and opened fire. 2 raider ships were disabled in the opening attack. Meanwhile, Vexthor's force had completed their scan and began their approach. First Squadron established covering fire. Second Squadron moved to extract civilians from the station's docking bay. It was perfect coalition tactics. Measured, safe, effective. But it was slower than the human approach. Jake's force was already in close combat with the raiders. Kresh's vessel, shields nearly gone, pushed through a raider formation. The other human vessels followed, weapons blazing. Sir, we're taking heavy damage, reported Kelly, one of the human cadets on Jake's crew. Can you still fight? Yes, sir. Then keep fighting. The raiders break or we break them. In the observation gallery, whispers ran through the watching crowd. The human force was taking punishment that should have forced them to retreat. But they kept pressing forward. Then the situation changed. A raider ship, damaged but still dangerous, began an attack run on the civilian station itself. If it succeeded, hundreds of simulated civilians would die. Both commanders saw it at the same time. Second Squadron intercept, Vexthor ordered, but his ships were out of position, still setting up their perimeter. They couldn't reach the raider in time. Jake's voice cut through the communications. Marcus, you're closest. Stop that ship. Marcus was a Drogath cadet. His species was known for physical strength, but also for careful, methodical thinking. He looked at his tactical display. The only way to intercept in time would be to abandon his current position, leaving Kresh's side exposed. It went against every instinct of his training. Sir, if I break formation, I know. Do it anyway. Kresh can handle it. A moment's pause. Then, understood. Breaking formation. Marcus's vessel pulled away, accelerating toward the raider threatening the station. He wouldn't reach it in time for a clean shot. There was only one option. In the observation gallery, Vexthor's eyes widened as he realized what was about to happen. Marcus rammed the raider vessel. The simulated impact destroyed both ships. Marcus's crew showed his casualties, but the raider was stopped. The station was saved. Casualty report, Jake said quietly. Marcus's entire crew killed in simulation. The observation gallery was silent. Several cadets looked shaken, but Jake wasn't finished. Marcus, that was the right call. Well done, sir. My entire crew is dead, and 300 civilians are alive. You did your job. On Vexthor's command ship, the Coalition commander reassessed the situation. The human force had taken severe casualties but had broken the raider formation. His own forces had taken minimal damage but were still moving into position. Adjust formation, Vexthor ordered. Support the human vessels. They've broken the raiders' organization. Let's finish this. What followed was a perfect example of combined operations. Jake's remaining vessels, damaged but aggressive, kept the raiders confused and off balance. Vexthor's ships, fresh and at full strength, delivered precise fire that eliminated raiders one by one. 10 minutes later, the last raider was destroyed. The simulation ended. Exercise complete, Amy announced. Begin casualty assessment. The numbers appeared on the main display. Coalition force, 3 casualties, crew injuries only. Human force, 47 casualties, 1 vessel destroyed, others heavily damaged. Raider force eliminated. Civilian casualties, 12. Unavoidable from initial raider attack. Time to complete mission, 18 minutes. For comparison, the previous record for this scenario completed by an all-coalition force showed Coalition force, 0 casualties. Raider force eliminated. Civilian casualties, 89. Time to complete mission, 47 minutes. The observation gallery erupted in discussion. The human force had suffered heavy casualties, but they had saved over 70 additional civilians and completed the mission in a third of the time. As the cadets exited their simulators, Jake gathered his crew. First, I want to say you all performed exceptionally. Every one of you made decisions that would have been difficult for experienced officers. He looked directly at Marcus. Marcus, I'm especially proud of your choice. I know that went against everything your people value about preserving life, but you understood that sometimes the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Marcus's rocky features showed emotion. Lieutenant Commander, in my culture we have a saying, a stone that moves saves the mountain. I think I understand it better now. Jake turned to Zira. And Zira, your side attack was perfect. You saw the opportunity and took it without hesitation. Thank you, sir. Though I must admit my uncle's training told me it was reckless. It was reckless, but it was also necessary. Vexthor approached with his crew. Lieutenant Commander, well executed. Though I must point out that your casualty rate would be considered unacceptable in real combat. Agreed. But tell me, Commander, how many civilians died in your previous record attempt? 77 more than died today. Vexthor's scales rippled thoughtfully. I see your point. The question isn't whether my approach is better than yours. The question is whether combining our approaches might be better than either alone.